Marcus Licinius Crassus possessed more gold than entire kingdoms, commanded armies that could crush nations, and wielded influence that could topple governments. Yet his story ended not in triumph, but in one of history's most horrifying and symbolic deaths. By the end of this video, you'll discover how the pursuit of glory transformed Rome's wealthiest citizen into a cautionary tale that echoes through the ages, and why his final moments reveal the dark price of unchecked power. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary tale, I want to make a quick invitation. If you're new to the channel and want to follow more content like this, subscribe and click like to help the channel grow. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing quality content to you. Now, let's return to the fascinating and tragic world of Marcus Licinius Crassus. Picture the marble halls of a Roman villa in the year 70 before Christ, where golden vessels catch the morning light and slaves move silently through corridors adorned with the spoils of conquest. Here lived a man whose personal fortune exceeded the annual revenue of the Roman treasury itself. Marcus Licinius Crassus had transformed from a young aristocrat fleeing civil war into the undisputed financial titan of the ancient world. Every Roman citizen knew his name, not just for his wealth, but for the power it bought him. Senators sought his favor, generals requested his backing, and even the mighty Pompey and Julius Caesar found themselves in his debt. Crassus had discovered what few men in history would ever learn: that in Rome, gold was more powerful than blood, more lasting than conquest, and more dangerous than any weapon ever forged. But wealth, as Crassus would discover, came with its own curse. For a man who owned everything, there remained only one treasure beyond his grasp: military glory. In a society that worshipped warrior heroes and celebrated conquest above all else, Crassus faced a humiliating truth. Despite his vast fortune and political influence, he had never led a truly great military campaign. He had never carved his name into history alongside Alexander, Pompey, or Caesar through the conquest of distant lands and exotic peoples. This burning ambition would drive him to seek what money could not buy: immortal fame through military conquest. He would set his eyes on the wealthy Parthian Empire, a realm of silk and spices that stretched from the Euphrates to the edges of India. The Parthians possessed riches that even Crassus envied, and their defeat would finally prove that he deserved to stand among Rome's greatest military heroes. Yet what awaited him in the desert sands of Mesopotamia was not glory, but a fate so terrible that it would become legend. His end would serve as a mirror reflecting the very nature of his life's obsession, transforming the man who worshipped gold into its eternal prisoner. But to understand how Rome's richest man walked willingly into the trap that would destroy him, we must journey back to the chaos and violence that forged his character, and witness how a young aristocrat learned that in Rome's brutal world, only gold could guarantee survival. The year was 87 before Christ, and Rome burned with the flames of civil war. The cobblestones of the Forum ran red with blood as rival factions tore the Republic apart from within. In this chaos, young Marcus Licinius Crassus learned his first and most crucial lesson. In Rome, survival belonged not to the brave or the noble, but to the wealthy and the cunning. Crassus came from an ancient patrician family that had served Rome for generations. His father, Publius Licinius Crassus, had been a respected consul and military commander, a man who embodied the traditional Roman virtues of honor, duty, and service to the state. But tradition and honor meant nothing when Gaius Marius and his populace seized control of Rome in a bloody purge. The elder Crassus found himself on the wrong side of politics, and in Rome's civil wars, being on the wrong side meant death. The young Crassus watched as his father's name appeared on the proscription lists, those terrible documents that marked men for execution and confiscation of property. In a single night, everything the Crassus family had built over centuries vanished. His father died by his own hand rather than face capture. His brother fell to assassins' blades, and young Marcus fled Rome with nothing but his life and a burning determination that he would never again be vulnerable to the whims of fate. Hiding in the caves of southern Spain, surrounded by a handful of loyal followers, Crassus experienced poverty for the first and last time in his life. Here, in the darkness of those caverns, he forged his philosophy. Power in Rome came from one source alone: money. Not birth, not honor, not military glory, but cold, hard wealth that could buy armies, purchase loyalty, and ensure survival when all else failed. When Lucius Cornelius Sulla marched on Rome to reclaim the city from Marius's faction, Crassus saw his opportunity. He emerged from exile not as a broken refugee, but as a calculating young man who understood that civil war meant opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. He raised his own army using the remnants of his family's fortune and joined Sulla's cause, but not out of loyalty or principle. Crassus had learned to see civil war as the ultimate business opportunity. During Sulla's proscriptions, the systematic execution and property seizure of political enemies, Crassus revealed his true nature. While other nobles participated in the bloodbath out of revenge or ideology, Crassus approached it with the cold calculation of a merchant. He studied the proscription lists not for personal enemies, but for business opportunities. When wealthy men were marked for death, Crassus would arrive at their properties with pre-prepared purchase documents, offering to buy their estates for a fraction of their worth. Desperate families, facing execution and confiscation, sold to him gladly. But Crassus's most notorious innovation was his manipulation of the proscription process itself. He would approach Sulla's administration with carefully prepared cases against wealthy Romans, providing evidence of their supposed crimes against the state. Once these men were added to the death lists, Crassus would swoop in to purchase their properties before their execution. In this way, he transformed political murder into a profitable enterprise. The most shocking example of his methods involved a wealthy landowner named Lucius Junius Brutus Damasippus. Crassus discovered that Damasippus owned vast silver mines in southern Italy, properties that could generate enormous wealth for decades to come. Despite having no personal grievance against the man, Crassus fabricated evidence that Damasippus had secretly supported Marius's faction. Within days, Damasippus found his name on the proscription lists. As the condemned man fled Rome in terror, Crassus appeared at his villa with a purchase contract, offering to buy the mines for 1/10 their actual value. Faced with the choice between selling and losing everything to execution and confiscation, Damasippus signed. 3 days later, he died by suicide rather than face capture. This ruthless efficiency earned Crassus not condemnation, but admiration from Sulla himself. The dictator recognized in the young man a kindred spirit, someone who understood that in times of chaos, the strong take from the weak, and morality becomes a luxury that only the victorious can afford. Sulla granted Crassus additional properties and business opportunities, setting him on the path to unimaginable wealth. But even as his fortune grew, Crassus remained haunted by those nights in the Spanish caves. He developed an obsession with acquiring property that bordered on the pathological. He would purchase not just profitable estates, but any property that came available, driven by a terror of ever again being without resources. His agents scoured the Mediterranean world for investment opportunities, buying everything from silver mines in Spain to wheat fields in Egypt, from urban tenements in Rome to timber forests in Gaul. By 70 before Christ, Crassus had become something unprecedented in Roman history, a man whose personal wealth rivaled that of entire provinces. His financial network extended across the known world. His influence reached into every corner of Roman politics, and his name was spoken with equal measures of respect and fear. He had achieved what he set out to accomplish. He had made himself invulnerable through the accumulation of vast wealth. Yet as he stood in his marble halls, surrounded by golden treasures and served by hundreds of slaves, Crassus faced a new and unexpected problem. In Rome's honor-obsessed society, wealth alone could not purchase the one thing he had begun to crave above all others: respect as a military leader. Romans honored conquerors above merchants, warriors above financiers. Despite his vast fortune, Crassus found himself dismissed by many as nothing more than a glorified moneylender, a man who had grown rich from others' misfortunes rather than earning glory through honest conquest. This dismissal stung more deeply than poverty ever had. When senators spoke of Rome's great men, they mentioned Pompey's conquests in the east, Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, and Scipio's victory over Hannibal. Crassus's name was associated not with military triumph, but with real estate transactions and loan agreements. For a man who had transformed himself from a penniless exile into the wealthiest person in the world, this represented an unacceptable failure. But what Crassus failed to understand was that his obsession with military glory would lead him to make the one decision that all his wealth and cunning could not undo. His hunger for a place among Rome's warrior heroes would drive him to challenge an enemy that had never been defeated, in a land where gold meant nothing and Roman tactics had never been tested. But what no one expected was that Crassus's first real opportunity for military command would come not from foreign conquest, but from a rebellion that would shake the very foundations of Roman society. Slave revolt led by a gladiator whose name would become legend, and whose defeat would finally give Crassus a taste of the glory he craved, while simultaneously revealing the terrible price of his methods. The gladiatorial schools of Capua had always been powder kegs waiting to explode, but in 73 before Christ, something unprecedented happened. A Thracian warrior named Spartacus, scarred by years of fighting for Roman entertainment, did what no slave had ever successfully accomplished. He transformed a desperate escape into a revolution that would threaten Rome itself. What began as a breakout of 78 gladiators from Richest's training facility quickly snowballed into something that sent shockwaves through the Roman world. These were not ordinary slaves fleeing for freedom. These were trained killers, men who had spent years learning every technique of combat, every weakness of Roman military equipment, every psychological trick needed to break an opponent's will. Under Spartacus's brilliant leadership, they began doing something that terrified Roman aristocrats more than any foreign invasion. They were turning slaves into soldiers. Within months, Spartacus's army had swollen to over 70,000 fighters. Plantation slaves, household servants, mine workers, and gladiators from across southern Italy flocked to his banner. They defeated Roman force after Roman force, not through luck or desperation, but through superior tactics and unbreakable determination. Spartacus had done the impossible. He had created a competent military force from the bottom of Roman society, and that force was winning. For Rome's elite, this represented an existential crisis that went far beyond military defeat. The foundation of Roman civilization rested on the absolute subjugation of millions of slaves. If Spartacus succeeded, if his rebellion spread throughout the Mediterranean world, the entire economic and social structure of the Republic would collapse. Every Roman citizen understood that this was not merely a war, it was a fight for the survival of their way of life. The Senate had already suffered the humiliation of watching their armies flee before slave forces. 2 praetors had been defeated and killed, their legions scattered or destroyed. The rebellion had grown so powerful that Spartacus was negotiating with pirates to transport his army across the Mediterranean, potentially spreading the revolt to every corner of the Roman world. Rome needed a commander capable of ending this nightmare, but who could be trusted with such a crucial mission? This was the moment Crassus had been waiting for his entire life. Here was a military command that would finally allow him to prove his worth as something more than a wealthy businessman. But more importantly, here was an opportunity that perfectly suited his particular talents. While other commanders might approach the slave war as a conventional military campaign, Crassus understood that this conflict would be won through the same methods that had made him rich: ruthless calculation, superior resources, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary for victory. When Crassus approached the Senate requesting command of the war against Spartacus, he made an offer that no other Roman could match. He would not only serve without payment from the state treasury, but he would personally finance the entire campaign. He would recruit, equip, and supply 8 legions, nearly 50,000 men, using his own vast fortune. For a republic struggling with the enormous costs of multiple wars, this offer was irresistible. But Crassus's generosity came with calculated advantages. By financing the war himself, he ensured absolute control over every aspect of the campaign. His soldiers would be loyal to him personally, not to the state. His officers would be men he had chosen and promoted. His supply lines would be managed by his own business networks. In effect, Crassus was purchasing not just a military command, but a private army that answered to him alone. His first action as commander revealed the strategic mind that had made him Rome's wealthiest citizen. Rather than immediately pursuing Spartacus's main force, Crassus systematically eliminated the rebellion's support structure. He deployed his vast intelligence network, the same agents who had made him rich through insider information, to identify and destroy the underground networks that supplied Spartacus with recruits, weapons, and information. Crassus understood what previous commanders had missed. Spartacus's strength came not from his gladiators, but from the constant stream of new recruits joining his cause. Every victory over Roman forces brought thousands of new slaves to his banner. Every successful raid provided weapons and supplies. Crassus set out to break this cycle by making rebellion economically unsustainable. He offered enormous bounties for information about rebel supply lines, creating a network of informants that penetrated deep into slave communities. He purchased the loyalty of ship captains and merchants, cutting off Spartacus's access to maritime escape routes. Most ruthlessly, he implemented a policy of collective punishment that made supporting the rebellion a death sentence for entire communities. When the city of Thurii was suspected of providing supplies to Spartacus, Crassus did not merely punish the guilty parties. He ordered the crucifixion of every 10th man in the city, regardless of their involvement. The message was clear: supporting the slave rebellion would bring consequences so terrible that even the innocent would suffer. This policy of calculated terror proved devastatingly effective, as communities across southern Italy turned against the rebels to avoid Crassus's wrath. But Crassus's masterstroke came when he identified Spartacus's greatest weakness: the rebel leader's dependence on Cilician pirates for transportation across the Mediterranean. Using his extensive business contacts, Crassus secretly negotiated with the pirate leaders, offering them a fortune in gold to abandon their alliance with Spartacus. When the gladiator army reached the coast expecting evacuation, they found empty harbors and broken promises. Trapped in southern Italy with winter approaching, Spartacus found himself facing an enemy unlike any he had encountered before. Crassus was not merely a Roman general seeking military glory. He was a businessman treating the war as a hostile takeover, applying the same methods that had destroyed his commercial rivals to the destruction of the slave rebellion. The final confrontation came near the Salaris River in 71 before Christ. Spartacus, desperate and surrounded, chose to die as he had lived, as a warrior. He fought his way through the Roman lines seeking personal combat with Crassus himself, hoping that killing the enemy commander might shatter Roman morale and allow his followers to escape. But Crassus, true to his nature, refused to risk personal combat. He had not spent decades accumulating wealth and power to throw it away in a moment of martial pride. Instead, he directed the battle from a secure position, using his superior numbers and resources to systematically destroy the rebel army. Spartacus died fighting, cut down by Roman soldiers while his army disintegrated around him. The aftermath of Spartacus's defeat revealed the full extent of Crassus's calculated cruelty. Along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome, he crucified 6,000 captured rebels, creating a forest of crosses that stretched for over 100 miles. These crucifixions served multiple purposes. They provided a horrifying warning to any future rebels, they demonstrated Roman power to intimidate other slave populations, and they satisfied Crassus's desire for a spectacular display of his victory. But perhaps most importantly, the mass crucifixions revealed something fundamental about Crassus's character. While other Roman commanders might have shown mercy to defeated enemies or sought to minimize casualties, Crassus approached war with the same cold calculation he brought to business. The 6,000 crucified slaves were not just military casualties. They were a calculated investment in future control, a horrifying advertisement for the price of rebellion against Roman authority. The victory over Spartacus finally gave Crassus what he had always craved: recognition as a military commander worthy of respect. The Senate granted him a triumph, the highest honor Rome could bestow on a victorious general. As his chariot rolled through the streets of Rome, followed by captured treasures and chained prisoners, Crassus experienced the intoxicating taste of military glory that had eluded him for so long. But even in his moment of triumph, Crassus felt the bitter sting of incomplete victory. While he celebrated in Rome, his rival Pompey had been campaigning in Spain, winning glory against foreign enemies rather than rebellious slaves. When the two men met outside Rome, both claiming credit for ending the slave war, the Roman people made their preference clear. They celebrated Pompey as the hero who had finished what Crassus had started. This perceived slight ignited a rage in Crassus that would burn for the rest of his life. He had achieved military victory through superior strategy and overwhelming resources, yet the glory was shared with a rival who had contributed almost nothing to the campaign. The taste of recognition had only intensified his hunger for unquestionable military achievement, for a conquest so magnificent that no one could diminish his role or share his credit. However, what was about to happen would surpass all expectations and reveal secrets that had remained hidden for millennia. Because Crassus's obsession with proving himself the equal of Rome's greatest generals would lead him to challenge the one enemy that had never bent to Roman will, in a land where his wealth meant nothing and his tactical innovations would face their ultimate test against the masters of mounted warfare who ruled the eastern horizon. The year 60 before Christ brought an alliance that would reshape the Roman world forever. In a secret meeting that would become known as the First Triumvirate, 3 of Rome's most powerful men agreed to divide the Republic among themselves. Pompey the Great, master of the Eastern Mediterranean; Julius Caesar, the brilliant politician and rising military star; and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the man whose wealth had made the alliance possible. On the surface, this partnership seemed to give Crassus everything he desired. As the financier of the triumvirate, he wielded influence over Rome's 2 greatest military commanders. His loans funded Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, his gold purchased Pompey's political support, and his business networks provided intelligence that kept all 3 men ahead of their rivals. Yet beneath this facade of partnership lay a truth that ate at Crassus's soul. He remained the junior member of the alliance, respected for his money but overshadowed by his partner's military achievements. Caesar's dispatches from Gaul arrived in Rome like thunderbolts, each one describing victories that added to his growing legend. The conquest of the Helvetii, the defeat of Ariovistus, the submission of the Belgae. With each triumph, Caesar's star rose higher while Crassus found himself increasingly defined by his role as the triumvirate's banker rather than its warrior. Meanwhile, Pompey's earlier conquests in the East had already earned him the title Magnus, the Great, and made him Rome's most celebrated living general. This comparison became unbearable during the triumvirate's renewal in 56 before Christ. As the three men met to extend their partnership, the conversation inevitably turned to their future commands. Caesar would continue his spectacular conquests in Gaul, likely extending Roman power all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Pompey would govern Spain from Rome, maintaining his grip on the western Mediterranean. But what remained for Crassus? The answer came in the form of Syria, a wealthy province that bordered the mysterious Parthian Empire. To most Romans, this seemed like a perfect assignment for Crassus, a rich territory where his administrative skills and business acumen could generate enormous profits for both himself and Rome. But Crassus saw something far more valuable than Syria's wealth. He saw the opportunity for a conquest that would finally eclipse both his partner's achievements. The Parthian Empire stretched from the Euphrates River to the borders of India and China, a vast realm that controlled the lucrative silk trade routes connecting east and west. The Parthians possessed wealth that even Crassus envied, cities filled with gold and precious stones, and most tantalizingly, they had never been conquered by Roman arms. A successful invasion of Parthia would not only bring unimaginable riches to Rome but would establish Crassus as the greatest general in Roman history, the man who had succeeded where even Alexander the Great had struggled. But Crassus's obsession blinded him to the warnings that came from every knowledgeable source. Syria's governor, Aulus Gabinius, had attempted to probe Parthian defenses and returned with sobering reports about their military capabilities. The Parthians fought unlike any enemy Rome had ever faced. Their armies consisted almost entirely of cavalry, heavily armored cataphracts who could charge with devastating force, and swift horse archers who could rain arrows while remaining constantly mobile. More ominously, the Parthians had developed tactics specifically designed to counter Roman infantry formations. Rather than meeting legions head-on, they would use their mobility to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, creating chaos in Roman ranks while remaining too fast to catch. They had already demonstrated these methods against several Roman expeditions, leaving few survivors to report on their devastating effectiveness. Perhaps most troubling was the warning that came from King Artavasdes of Armenia, Rome's most reliable ally in the region. The Armenian king had fought both alongside and against the Parthians for decades, and he understood their capabilities better than any Roman. When Crassus arrived in Syria in 54 before Christ, Artavasdes personally traveled to meet him, bringing an urgent message. The Parthians were preparing for a Roman invasion, and they were confident of victory. Artavasdes offered Crassus an alternative strategy that could have changed everything. Instead of marching directly across the Mesopotamian desert into the heart of Parthian territory, the Armenian king proposed a northern route through his own kingdom. This path would allow Crassus to recruit Armenian cavalry to supplement his legions, provide secure supply lines through friendly territory, and most importantly, force the Parthians to fight on terrain that favored infantry over cavalry. But Crassus rejected this advice with the arrogance that had defined his entire career. He had built his fortune by trusting his own judgment over the warnings of others, and he saw no reason to change this approach now. The northern route would require sharing glory with Armenian allies, and it would take longer to reach the wealthy Parthian cities that were his ultimate objective. Most fatally, Crassus believed that Roman military superiority was absolute, that no enemy could stand against the legions that had conquered the Mediterranean world. His confidence seemed justified by the composition of his army. Crassus had assembled 7 legions, over 42,000 of Rome's finest soldiers, supported by 4,000 cavalry and an equal number of auxiliary troops. These were not raw recruits but veteran warriors, many of whom had fought under his command against Spartacus. His officers included some of Rome's most experienced commanders, and his equipment was the finest that Roman engineering could produce. But what Crassus failed to understand was that the Parthians had been preparing for this confrontation for years. Their king, Oroda II, had studied Roman tactics extensively and developed countermeasures that exploited every weakness in Roman military doctrine. The Parthian army that assembled to meet Crassus's invasion was not a typical Eastern force. It was a military machine specifically designed to destroy Roman legions. The Parthian commander chosen to face Crassus was Surina, a young nobleman whose family had served as kingmakers for generations. Despite his youth, Surina possessed an understanding of warfare that combined traditional Parthian mobility with innovative tactical concepts that had never been tested against Roman forces. He commanded 10,000 cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry that could charge with the force of a thunderbolt, and 40,000 horse archers whose composite bows could penetrate Roman armor at distances that Roman weapons could not match. Most crucially, Surena had solved the traditional problem of horse archer warfare: ammunition supply. Previous Eastern armies had been forced to withdraw when their archers exhausted their arrows, but Surena had organized a supply train of camels carrying hundreds of thousands of arrows. His horse archers could maintain their devastating fire indefinitely, turning the battlefield into a killing ground from which Roman infantry could neither advance nor retreat. The confrontation came at Carrhae in 53 before Christ, a small town in the Mesopotamian desert that would become synonymous with Roman military disaster. As Crassus's legions advanced across the burning sands, confident in their invincibility, they encountered an enemy unlike anything in their experience. The Parthian army appeared as a shimmering mirage on the horizon, their armor gleaming in the desert sun, their numbers seeming to multiply as they spread across the battlefield. Surena's tactical genius became immediately apparent. Rather than charging directly at the Roman formations, he deployed his forces in a vast crescent that enveloped Crassus's army on three sides. The heavily armored cataphracts remained in reserve while the horse archers began their deadly work, sending clouds of arrows into the packed Roman ranks from a distance that made retaliation impossible. Roman soldiers, trained to fight with sword and shield in close formation, found themselves helpless against an enemy they could not reach. The Parthian arrows, fired from powerful composite bows, penetrated Roman armor and shields with terrifying ease. Men fell by the hundreds, then by the thousands, while the enemy remained tantalizingly out of reach. Crassus ordered his cavalry to charge the horse archers, but the Parthians simply galloped away, firing backward as they retreated in the devastating maneuver known as the Parthian shot. When Roman horsemen pursued too far, the cataphracts would charge from concealment, crushing the scattered Roman units with their superior numbers and equipment. As the day wore on, the true horror of Crassus's situation became clear. His army was trapped in an open desert with no shelter from the constant arrow fire, no water to relieve their thirst, and no tactical options that could bring them within striking distance of the enemy. The Parthians could maintain their attack indefinitely, resupplying their archers from the camel train while Roman ammunition dwindled to nothing. The climax of the battle came when Crassus's son Publius led a desperate cavalry charge aimed at breaking the Parthian encirclement. The young man, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's name, gathered the finest Roman horsemen and charged directly at Surena's position. For a moment, it seemed as though Roman courage might triumph over Parthian tactics, as Publius's force smashed through the enemy's front line. But this apparent success was another trap. Surena had deliberately weakened his center, allowing the Romans to penetrate deeply into Parthian territory before springing his ambush. The cataphracts closed in from all sides, surrounding Publius's cavalry in a killing circle from which none would escape. When the slaughter ended, Publius's severed head was mounted on a spear and displayed before the horrified Roman army, shattering whatever morale remained in Crassus's ranks. The sight of his son's death broke something fundamental in Crassus's spirit. The man who had built an empire through calculated risks and careful planning found himself paralyzed by grief and despair. As his army disintegrated around him, suffering casualties that approached 75% of his original force, Crassus faced the terrible reality that his obsession with military glory had led to the greatest Roman military disaster since Hannibal's victory at Cannae. But the most horrifying revelation was yet to come. As night fell over the battlefield littered with Roman corpses, Surena approached under a flag of truce, offering to negotiate. The Parthian general, who had orchestrated one of the most complete military victories in ancient history, claimed he still respected Crassus as a worthy opponent and was willing to discuss terms for the survival of the remaining Roman forces. What happened next would become legend, a story so terrible and symbolic that it would be told for centuries as a warning about the price of unchecked ambition. For Crassus, who had spent his life worshipping gold above all else, was about to discover that even in death, his obsession would follow him into eternity. The meeting between Crassus and Surena would reveal the ultimate irony of a life spent in pursuit of wealth and glory, as the man who had turned everything he touched into gold was about to become gold himself, in a manner more literal and terrifying than he could ever have imagined, creating a legend that would echo through history as the perfect symbol of greed's ultimate price. The negotiation between Crassus and Surena began as a diplomatic meeting but quickly revealed itself as something far more sinister. As the two commanders met between their armies, Surena's true intentions became clear. This was not a negotiation for surrender. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed to capture the Roman general alive. When Crassus realized the deception and attempted to flee, Parthian soldiers seized him, bringing to an end the life of Rome's wealthiest citizen in the most ironically appropriate manner imaginable. What followed became one of history's most symbolic executions. According to the accounts that reached Rome, Surina ordered molten gold to be poured down Crassus's throat, declaring that since the Roman had shown such insatiable thirst for wealth, he should drink his fill of the metal he had worshipped throughout his life. Whether this account is literally true or represents a later embellishment, its symbolic power captured something essential about Crassus's character and fate. The man who had built his fortune by exploiting others' desperate circumstances found himself in the ultimate desperate circumstance, with no amount of wealth capable of purchasing his survival. The general who had crucified 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way discovered that cruelty, like gold, flows both ways. Most ironically, the aristocrat who had spent decades accumulating treasure to ensure his security died because his hunger for military glory had led him beyond the reach of his protective wealth. But Crassus's death represented more than just personal tragedy. It marked a turning point in Roman history that would have consequences far beyond his individual fate. His disastrous Parthian campaign had eliminated 1/3 of the First Triumvirate, destroying the delicate balance of power that had kept the Roman Republic stable. With Crassus gone, his former partners Caesar and Pompey faced each other without the wealthy mediator whose loans and influence had bound them together. The rivalry between Caesar and Pompey, no longer moderated by Crassus's presence, would soon erupt into the civil war that would destroy the Roman Republic forever. In pursuing personal glory, Crassus had inadvertently triggered the chain of events that would transform Rome from a republic into an empire, ending nearly 5 centuries of representative government. His death at Carrhae thus became not just the end of one man's ambition, but the beginning of the end for Roman democracy itself. The deeper lesson of Crassus's story resonates across the centuries because it reveals timeless truths about wealth, power, and human nature. Crassus had achieved something that few humans in history ever accomplish. He had accumulated wealth beyond measure, influence beyond challenge, and security beyond threat. Yet none of these achievements brought him the satisfaction he craved. Instead, his success only intensified his hunger for the one thing his money could not buy: recognition as a great military leader. This paradox highlights a fundamental aspect of human psychology that remains as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. External achievements, no matter how spectacular, cannot fill the internal void created by insecurity and the need for validation. Crassus's wealth had made him powerful, but it had not made him content. His victory over Spartacus had given him military credentials, but it had not satisfied his hunger for glory. Each success only raised the bar higher, creating an endless cycle of achievement and dissatisfaction that ultimately led to his destruction. The story also serves as a warning about the corrupting nature of unlimited wealth and power. Crassus's fortune had insulated him from consequences for so long that he lost the ability to accurately assess risk. When advisors warned him about Parthian military capabilities, he dismissed their concerns because he had grown accustomed to overcoming obstacles through the application of superior resources. His wealth had become not just a tool for achieving his goals, but a barrier that prevented him from understanding the world beyond his golden cocoon. Perhaps most significantly, Crassus's fate demonstrates how individual obsessions can have consequences that extend far beyond personal tragedy. His pursuit of military glory did not occur in isolation. It affected the balance of power in Rome, the stability of the Mediterranean world, and ultimately the course of Western civilization. When powerful individuals pursue personal ambitions without considering broader consequences, entire societies can pay the price for their miscalculations. The irony of molten gold poured down Crassus's throat serves as a perfect metaphor for the relationship between unlimited desire and ultimate destruction. The very substance that had given him power became the instrument of his death, transforming from a source of life into an agent of annihilation. This transformation reflects a deeper truth about all forms of obsession. When pursued beyond reasonable limits, even beneficial things become destructive forces. Modern parallels to Crassus's story appear regularly in contemporary news, as wealthy individuals and powerful corporations pursue goals that ultimately prove self-destructive. The pattern remains consistent across cultures and centuries. Initial success breeds confidence, confidence leads to overreach, and overreach results in catastrophic failure. Understanding this pattern provides valuable insight into the cyclical nature of rise and fall that characterizes both individual careers and entire civilizations. Crassus's legacy extends beyond his personal tragedy to encompass broader questions about the nature of success and fulfillment in human life. His story suggests that true satisfaction comes not from accumulating more of what we already possess, but from developing the wisdom to appreciate what we have already achieved. The wealthiest man in Rome died poor in spirit because he never learned that enough can actually be enough. Stories like this show us that the past is more alive than we imagine, and each lesson from ancient history illuminates patterns that continue to shape our world today, reminding us that human nature remains remarkably consistent across the millennia, and the choices made by individuals in pursuit of their deepest desires continue to ripple through time in ways they never anticipated. If you made it this far and are not yet subscribed, take advantage and subscribe now. Leave a like and share in the comments your thoughts on whether Crassus's pursuit of military glory was inevitable given his character, or if you think he could have found satisfaction in his already remarkable achievements. Until the next video.